All right, so let's talk about this and what it all has to do with inheritance in object-oriented programming languages. So here's some code, some very simple code. It creates two instances of a customer class, some class that we've defined that, based on the name, we can assume has information about this organization's customers. Now, in this case, the two instances of the customer class are representing two different kinds of customers. So one represents a corporate customer. So that's this first instance here. So I'm newing up a customer object. I'm setting the customer name to Biggie Industries, some sort of a corporate name. And then I'm recording some sales. And in the second instance, I'm creating another instance of the customer class, setting the customer name property. Notice it's the same name as the property here, but I'm using it in a different way because individual customers have first and last names, not just a single unified name like most organizations have. All right, and then I once again call the record sales method that is now recording sales for an individual customer. Okay, so the customer class defines properties and methods. Are these the appropriate members for every customer? If there's more than one type of customer, they may not be. So in this code, there really are two unique types of customers, corporate and individual. Both customers have a name, but a corporation has one name, whereas a person has two or three or more. Both customers have an address, region, city, postal code, and country. A corporate customer might have a sales representative because they do such a high level of business with our company. May also have a credit limit because we extend credit to large organizations. And we probably need the ability to change that limit over time. An individual customer may be entitled to a 10% discount on his or her birthday. And that's a very uncommon thing to give a corporate customer a discount on, say, the anniversary of their creation. Okay, so using a single customer class to handle both of these kinds of customers has some issues. To account for the differences between the two types of customers, you could create a corporation class and an individual class. They would share a number of properties and methods. Each would also include properties and methods that are unique to that particular type of customer that they represent. But having two completely different customer objects, corporation and individual, really is not a good solution. A corporate customer and an individual customer are much more likely to be alike than they are different. They have more features that are similar than are different. And so the two classes would share most of their properties and methods. And if we implemented things this way, we'd be writing a lot of redundant code because a lot of the same properties and methods apply to both kinds of customers. So what you really want is the ability to create a class representing a generic customer, and then customize that class for the specific customer types. You can do this using inheritance. A class that inherits from another class automatically gets the members of that base class. Okay, so this shows inheritance hierarchy about how this could work. So customer in this case is called the base class. It's the top level class in the hierarchy. It's the most generic representation of a customer. So it's going to have all of the base features that define a customer. Things like demographic information, maybe, certainly location information, address information, maybe an email address, various things like that. And then the corporation and individual classes are derived classes, both of which inherit members from the base class, but both of which also implement their own member features in order to implement the unique features that define a corporation or distinguish a corporation from an individual customer. Okay, so now it's important to understand that the base class is the most general of the classes in this hierarchy. Each derived class is then more specific. And I'll be using those terms extensively as we talk about inheritance and define the relationship between these different objects. So inheritance defines an is-a relationship. A corporation is a customer. And because it is, a corporation has certain behaviors that you associate with a customer. A corporation has a name and a location, and you can sell to it. The same holds true for an individual. Now, the key to designing an inheritance hierarchy is to do a good job of defining that is-a relationship among objects that you'll use in your code. For example, although the corporation and individual classes will share many properties and methods, there are methods or members in each class that the other does not need. The differences between the two types of customers are significant enough to warrant making separate classes. So that's the big decision point that you have about whether or not you're going to put all of the functionality into a single customer class, or if there's enough differences, if there's enough different kinds of customers that you're working with to justify creating separate classes and creating this inheritance relationship between the base and the derived classes. Okay, so once you get to that point, you also have to ask whether you can further distinguish between different types of, say, corporate customers. Maybe there are domestic and foreign customers. In that case, you could create domestic corporation and foreign corporation classes that derive from the corporation class. And this shows an object hierarchy that defines that kind of a relationship. So I still have a base customer class that has the core functionality, the core features that define what a customer is. And then I have corporation and individual classes, same as I talked about previously. But now, because I may have subsets of corporation customers that are different enough to justify their own being their own derived classes, I can define these domestic corporation and foreign corporation. So now you have to ask the question, is there enough difference between these two types of corporate customers to warrant adding additional classes? Now you'll need to answer that question as you design your classes. There's no need for separate classes if the only difference between a domestic and foreign customer is the currency they use. In that case, you could simply add a currency property to the corporation class in order to handle that very simple difference. Another design consideration is whether a method should belong to a particular class. For example, you might need a method to translate from one currency to another. This shouldn't be a method of the foreign corporation class. You should put this in a helper class that you can use in many applications across all different kinds of classes. All right, so the bottom line is add classes to your inheritance hierarchy as often as needed, but only if needed. Take the time up front to think about whether you really need additional layers of derived classes. An is-a relationship is necessary, but it's not enough reason to add a new class. A foreign corporate customer is, in fact, a corporate customer. So is a domestic corporate customer. But if the only difference between a foreign and domestic customer is the currency they use, they shouldn't be in separate classes.